Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today, Planning for Fall Reopening for Early Learning. It's a pleasure to see everybody. I'm David Madison. I'm the Executive Director of the Southwestern Association of Episcopal Schools, and I'm joined by Mary Catherine Duffy, our Director of Professional Development. I will turn it over to her in just a moment, but I do want to make a couple of comments before we get started. First, a copy of the recording of this webinar will be available in the webinar library on our website. As will a copy of the slides. They will live in the document library on the website. So you'll need your login credentials to be able to access those. If you need to recover your login credentials, just contact Pat Blevins in our office and she'll make sure you have access to that. Also wanted to make sure that everyone was aware of the SAES resources that are available in light of all the different questions that we're trying to get our arms around with a fall reopen. So a couple things I'd like to highlight. First, make sure you're familiar with the CDC guidelines and then your state guidelines as well. Obviously, most of the facilities we're going to talk about today are licensed, so every state has their specific licensing guidelines, and you need to make sure you're aware of all those. Also, there are a couple of webinars I'd like to highlight. We hosted a webinar entitled Legal Considerations for Returning to Campus. That was conducted by our friends at Fisher Phillips. A lot of the questions that we may cover today involve legal problems, legal challenges, things like campus security, things like HR issues, paid leave, all those things. How are we communicating? What are we communicating? All those things. So if you have not taken a look at that webinar, I'd recommend that you do so. There's some really good information in there. Also, there's a document that you'll hear referenced in the webinar called Checklist for Policy Handbook. So in light of all the different COVID issues, our policy handbooks need to be updated. And so there's a roadmap in the form of a checklist in the document library that Fisher Phillips put together. So it's a very handy document. Take a look at that. Also, this webinar feels like it was years ago, but it really wasn't that long ago. Rob Evans and Michael Thompson hosted a session for us called Leading in a Time of Crisis. And they really did a great job at highlighting some of the strategies that we've been using as we're trying to navigate all this, and strategies that we certainly will continue to use as we reopen in the fall. So take a look at that if you haven't already. And then finally, make sure that you're using the head of school discussion board. So that's another area of the website where you'll need your login credentials, but there's a discussion board where lots of heads of schools are sharing ideas, trying to wrestle with the same type of issues, and are sharing how they're responding to those questions. So make sure you take advantage of that if you are not doing so already. And with that, again, thank you for being with us today. I'm going to turn it over to Mary Catherine Duffy, our Director of Professional Development. Mary Catherine.
Well, good morning, everyone. We're really glad you're here. We've got a great webinar for you today. We've got some really thoughtful people here who've taken the time to consider what it's going to look like with early childhood. And so yesterday was great. Today's going to be really great as well. And I'm really thrilled to have all three of them here. So what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce each one of them, and then I'm going to turn it over to Melissa, who's going to start. So first of all, we have Melissa Pinnell. Go ahead and wave at us, Melissa. Melissa is at Trinity Episcopal in Fort Worth. She's the head of school there, and she's going to start, and then we're going to shoot over to Leslie Badinsky, who's over at Kids of the Kingdom in San Antonio. And then we're going to wrap it up with Beth Lawrence, who's at St. Thomas Early Learning Center in College Station. And they each have a different perspective, a little bit different program. And so we're honored to have all three of them here today. So Melissa, I'm going to go ahead and let you get started. She's going to share her screen. She's got some great information to share with us today.
Let's see if I can make this work today. Did it work this time?
Yeah, it did.
Perfect. Excellent. Well, I want to say, first of all, there we go. Does that look right to y'all now? Okay. So first of all, thank you for having me. My name is Melissa Pinnell, and I am the director at Trinity Episcopal School. So just a small amount of background on our school. We are an old-fashioned, traditional half-day academic preschool. So our hours are 9 until noon. We do offer before care from 8 to 9 and aftercare only until 2 p.m. So our models may look a little bit different than what your model looks like. We have opened back up. We opened on June 1st. And so a lot of the things that I'm going to share with you today are things that we put into practice. We are now ending our 6th week. And so these are things that we are currently doing that are working for us. So hopefully they'll work for you as well. Or at least maybe give you some thoughts on how you can adapt for your particular school. So just a little bit of background on kind of how we came to be open and what that looked like for us, how we made those decisions. First of all, we knew that there were restrictions in place for schools or daycare centers that were open for essential employees, for the children of essential employees. So what we began doing is just really back when all of this started in March, we just started really watching what those restrictions were, how things were being handled in full-time centers that were open, and kind of how those might affect us, what we needed to do similarly or differently, just trying to wrap our head around what might be coming. Then in May, if you are here in Texas, our governor in May said that they were going to start reopening in phases. And he addressed at that point, he said that the camps and childcare facilities, things were going to need to be open because without them, parents couldn't get back to work. But he didn't give us an exact date. So again, we really kind of dug deep and, what did we anticipate was going to happen? We anticipated issues with cleaning requirements, possibly changes of ratios. What was it going to look like to come in and out of our school? What were those entry requirements? How are we going to have to deal with buildings and playgrounds and lunch guidelines and all of those different things? So when the announcement came on June that we were going to be able to open June 1st, then we really had, they sent out a checklist for reopening, and we were able to compare that to what we were anticipating. And what we learned was that we were anticipating the correct things. So the first thing that we really needed to address was cleaning requirements, and we realized right off the bat we were already doing all of these things. All the things they put into place were also part of the minimum requirements already for licensed facilities, and so we were already doing those things, but I was really stressed about cleaning supplies. So as we began, one of the things we did was we sent out an email to our families and said, does anyone have any contacts where we can get some of these supplies? So we kind of put those things into motion in preparation to open on June 1st. The next big thing we knew we were going to need to address was our ratios. Now, we're a small school, and that's part of our charm. Parents like that we keep our ratios really, really small to begin with. So we looked at the requirements that the state was releasing and realized we were only going to have to reduce our ratios a very small amount. So we were going to go from 6 to 4 children in our toddler 2s. And for our 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, we were going to go from 8 children to 7. And then for our transitional summer programs where we would normally have 12, we went down to 9. So changing those ratios wasn't a huge issue for us. We also began really taking a careful look at those entry requirements. This made us pause just briefly because one of the requirements was that children needed to wash their hands before they entered the school. And we had to kind of scratch our head and say, ooh, how do you wash your hands before you ever even enter? They did give permission for us to use hand sanitizing stations, but you had to have hand sanitizer to do that. And of course that was in short supply. So what we did was we set up hand washing stations, and we brought out igloo coolers with warm water and set up outdoor hand washing stations. And again, that just worked really well for us, but we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. Another requirement was that children were going to need to be in pods and travel together all day. And so they couldn't cross. So the children from, for example, a toddler class could not be mixed in with children from a 2-year-old class. They had to be separated from the moment of entry till the moment their parents picked them up. And so in our buildings, that wasn't really a problem with the exception of maybe bathroom breaks. But we did look at that. We figured out with scheduling, we could easily address the bathroom issues and then the playground. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that shortly, but essentially we just segregated our playgrounds with temporary fencing, and it's worked. Lunch guidelines that they imposed weren't any different from what we did during the school year, so it wasn't really a problem for us. We don't prepare food on site. Our children bring lunches from home. And so it was not really an issue for us. And then other guidelines, probably the other big change was that no one could enter the building except for our staff. So no parents are allowed in the building, no visitors, no tours, those kinds of things. So again, these were not overly trying to us, but they were just things we needed to be aware of and look at. For us, our buildings are very unique, and so a lot of the issues that we were facing they worked for us because our property is set up so that we have 3 little buildings that are houses essentially, and so we have our summer program split amongst those 3 buildings, and it just works. So again, we'll talk more about that in just a second, but I just wanted to give you just a smidge of background on that. So the first thing that we really needed to identify was how families were going to pick up and drop off students with us. What were the requirements? How did that change the way we did things? So what we did was we created a health check / goodbye station. We put signs up that said, line up here, please social distance. And so parents lined up 6 feet apart. And we have 3 buildings, so we had 3 stations where parents would come and drop off based on the age of their child and which camp they were going to be involved in. So children we would do the health check. We would ask all the health questions, have you been exposed to anyone? Have you traveled outside of the country? All of those things that we know we need to ask. We took the children's temperature and logged it, and then the parents said goodbye, quick kiss goodbye, and then we moved the children down to the hand washing station, which is what you see a picture of here. So this is one of our staff members, and she is helping a little one wash their hands. And then we had another staff member who was standing by to escort children to their classes. Again, one of the entry requirements that we had to work around was the state of Texas has said you cannot have different pods of children crossing the entryways. And so how we handled that was we turned our emergency exits into entry and exit points for our classrooms. So every classroom has an emergency exit, so that became the door that the children would use to go in and out. So here again, our staff member is helping a little one wash their hands, and then a staff member then escorts that child to her correct classroom door where her teacher is there waiting to greet her or him. All staff that are interacting with parents at this point and or floating around campus are all masked. And so again, we're keeping all of those safety protocols in place. So masks is one of those questions that everybody wanted to know the answer to. Parents, staff, everybody's question was, are we going to have to be wearing a mask all day long? So the state of Texas in their reopening regulations actually answered that question for us. Any staff member who is working drop off or pick up and interacting with parents must wear a mask. So for about 15 minutes of drop off or pickup time, everybody is masked. Throughout the day, any staff floating between classrooms must wear a mask. Again, so our classroom aides, all of our float staff, they're wearing their masks. Anytime they are crossing from one room to another, then they're always masked. Teachers, however, who are in a classroom with their set pod of children do not have to be masked. Again, our children are toddler age, 2, 3, 4, and 5 years old. No one older than the age of 5. And so when the teacher is with that set group of children who she is assigned to on Monday, and she stays with the same group of kiddos all week, she does not have to wear a mask when she's in the classroom with that child or those children. However, if she leaves her bubble, example, if she has to go to the bathroom or if she leaves her bubble of her space, then yes, she must be masked. Children are not required to be masked. So another question that we needed an answer to was, well, how do we interact with our parents and how do we promote community? If we're segregating everybody to outside people versus inside people, how do we maintain that community? So the state did give us some guidelines. It said absolutely no visitors inside the building where the children are. Anyone who does need to enter the administrative space is required to be masked. But that just didn't feel homey to us. It didn't feel like we were really communicating with parents and having our normal community. So one of the things we did was we created a virtual tour so that prospective parents can go online and see our school. And then we have been taking a huge amount of pictures, pictures, and more pictures. We provided those on our Facebook page so that our families feel really connected. They can see our children, they can see our staff. I've taken lots of video as well as posted. And so just those things to make our community feel like we're still together as opposed to being separated inside versus outside.
Melissa, can I stop you for just a second and ask about that? The pictures, so are you only putting them on Facebook or are you sending them out via email? How else are you doing that?
So they are all on our Facebook page, and then our teachers all have access to our parent portal, which has the ability to send pictures as well. So especially if we have a fussy child, then the teacher can take a picture of that child and send it through our parent portal, and it'll go directly to that child's family individually. So they're getting lots of those types of pictures, and then they're also getting the ones that we're posting on Facebook.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, especially for our early childhood programs. That community aspect of what is really the hardest part is what we're hearing. Real quick, before you go on, I want to remind people the Q&A box is open. And so if you have questions as we walk through this and you want to put your question in the Q&A, if it's a burning question, we'll interrupt. If it's something we can wait till after, at the end, we're going to have time for Q&A. So we want you to put your questions there. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Melissa.
Oh, absolutely. A question that we've also received a lot is chapel. We don't do chapel during the summer. Our summer program is run like summer camp. So it's a little bit of a different model than we would use during the school year. So we never have chapel during this time, but we have always incorporated our Episcopal identity even into our summer program. And we do that by different activities that we do through the day, singing songs, prayers before meals, those types of things. And of course, encouraging our families to connect to their home parishes. And if they don't have a home parish, then again, reminding them that Trinity Episcopal Church has a fabulous program and has a great online presence. So if that's something that they're looking for. A few other factors that were a little challenging, I guess you could say, for us was our before and after care policy changes or policies that needed to be changed. So most of you can probably relate. For before care, we gather children. Every child who needs before care comes together. There's usually not that many of them. So we bring them together in one space, and then at 9 o'clock, when it's time for our program to start, they would be then taken, transition into their classrooms. Well, we can't do that right now because we can't mix those pods of children. The other piece of that is the aftercare. It's the same way. Normally, we offer two different types of aftercare. We call it stay and play. It's exactly what it sounds like. They can stay and play. And so that group of children would come together normally and play together and socialize together, or we offer enrichment activities, art classes, music classes, things like that, as after school enrichments. Well, we couldn't do any of that because we can't combine children at this time. So the solution to that for us has been, we made arrangements with every teacher to be able to interact with their parents and work on a classroom basis. If a child needed early care because a parent needed to be at work earlier than 9 o'clock, they would make an arrangement with the classroom teacher. And so that classroom teacher would meet that family early and just take that child in ahead of the 9 o'clock hour. And then the same thing, if a family needed to be here till 2 o'clock because they're working or what have you, they would make those arrangements via the office, but we would make those arrangements with the classroom teacher to stay. That's worked really, really well for us. Our families are, again, we're a small school, so we know most of our families really, really well. We know which ones are going to need that service, and we've just kept our communication open with them. And then the other piece was just really honing in on schedules, scheduling trips to the bathroom so that every child can have hand washing opportunities throughout the day, bathroom opportunities throughout the day. If a single child needed to enter the bathroom, then we have a floating aide who is in charge of the bathrooms. She's doing quick cleaning and sanitizing between groups of children. And then if a single child needed to go, she would assist them in that space as well. And then do a quick clean and sanitization after that child has exited. I was a little concerned about that being a very time-consuming process. It really hasn't been. When a group of children comes through, when they're done, our floating aide, she sprays everything down with our regular sanitizer. She lets that sit while she makes sure that, all the children are set and ready to go back with their classroom teachers. And then when she comes back, she does a quick wipe down. It really hasn't taken her but just a couple of minutes, and it's worked really well. It's not been the burden that we were concerned it would be. And then at the moment, again, during summer, we're just not rotating. So we're not having things like our PE classes, our Spanish classes, our art classes outside of the classroom. And the classroom teacher is just handling those things within her classroom. When school starts back up in the fall, we'll rotate our specials teachers to our children as opposed to our children rotating to our teacher. And we'll do things like PE outside. We've also found it was really easy to do individual sets of supplies for students. Crayons, we just put things in baggies, put children's names on it. Play-Doh, we make Play-Doh on Friday for the following week. And we know how many students we're expecting that following week. So we go ahead and pre-label it with students' names. It's just worked really easily, really well. And then on Friday, those disposable things like Play-Doh goes home with the child, and then we can spray Lysol and clean and sanitize the other supplies and then use them again. So again, it's worked really well. And then again, playground times, we have had to schedule that, and we'll look at that a little bit closer here in just a second. So one of our biggest supplies or concerns, again, is just making sure we had access to plenty of supplies. The EPA has an approved list of cleaners that we can use, and our regular product was already on that. It is a clot-based product, which basically means that it's good for 30 days. That's the non-scientific kind of answer there, as opposed to a bleach product, which has to be made daily. So we use a quat product. We happen to use a product called Basic G that is suggested by both our state and local licensing reps because it's a green product, meaning it's safe for children. And it's real easy to use. You spray it on things. Depending on what you're spraying it on, you let it set for 2 to 3 minutes and then go back and wipe it down. Or outside, it can be sprayed and let to dry. So it's just worked really well. Luckily for us, we had actually just restocked before we left for spring break with things like Lysol products. So we have a school full of that. But again, we're continuing to be on the lookout for those supplies to be available again. We also did receive a lovely donation of medical grade Santa Claus masks, hand gel, from a parent who works in medical supply. And so that was a really wonderful thing. Tap into your parents. Your parents are huge assets to you. And you don't know what someone may have access to unless you ask. So we just sent an email out. We asked that question. We did purchase thermometers back in April when we kind of had a sense that this was going to be coming. So luckily we also had kind of thought ahead and purchased those products to make sure we had what we needed. Looking ahead, fall is going to be harder than our summer camp. And so we are anticipating no chapel. No combined chapel, that is. We'll just intermingle that into our other things again until it is safe to be back together. And of course, our church isn't open. And so when the church opens back fully and we have priests on site full time, that'll be the time to have a discussion about going back to a combined chapel. Special classes, again, for us, we offer pullouts for science, Spanish, and music. Art, those things will just, some of them will be in the classrooms with the classroom teacher, and some of those things will have the teacher rotate to the classrooms. And so again, we're going to work through those. One of the things that I'm really kind of thinking about at this point is special events. And our first big special event we're going to have to tackle is Meet the Teacher. What's that going to look like? How's it going to be different? So I'm thinking picnic type style, where we meet outside on our playground, small groups, one class at a time on each of our sections of playground, to allow parents to at least meet the teacher and the teacher get to meet the parents and the children. Even though the parents won't be able to come in and look at the classrooms themselves, the majority of our families have been in our building and they're familiar with that. So we felt like that's okay. So we're looking towards those things. Other questions we're still looking for answers to is some of the same financial questions that you're getting. What happens to tuition in the event of a future closure? Again, those are all questions that we're still looking at. The short answer is our tuition is an academic year tuition. You're not paying day to day or week to week or even month to month. You're paying for the academic year, and we will provide services even if we have to be in an at-home situation. So that's the short answer, but again, we're looking at updating all of those policies and procedures. Other things we're still working out is how to handle staffing if someone's out sick. Again, we are a small school, so we don't have a lot of substitutes, and so our classroom aides become our substitute teachers, and then other staff like myself. So those are all things that we're still, working through. But we have begun to update our parent and employee handbooks so that we can look at these issues and we can figure out where our concerns are. And then most importantly is keeping an eye on our state licensing guidelines. They're huge. There are a lot of guidelines in there that they tell us specifically how to handle these things. So by keeping in contact with our representatives, our licensing agents, and what they're sending us, they're helping us by giving us a lot of those guidelines.
Yeah, and I think just to that point about the employee handbook especially, we would direct you to back to that legal webinar. Kristen did a great job of really talking about a lot of that on that webinar. So we'd encourage you to look at that as well.
Right, absolutely. I know I went through that really, really quickly. I could have elaborated for hours on these things, but just trying to be very mindful of time. But that's us, and that's who we are and how we've been doing things. Again, we're ending our 6th week, and so far it's working, and it's working really well. Our parents are happy, our staff is happy. None of the things we've had to put into place have been so prohibitive that it's caused major issues. So
Okay. Melissa, thank you. That's great. That's great information. I did have a one burning question for you, and that is, have you had a confirmed case in your school at this point? No?
No.
Okay. Okay, good.
I just would offer one thing. I think that the strategy Melissa communicated about tuition and how we're going to handle tuition, I think one that's a really strong strategy. And I think the way that she communicated that's the right way to go.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to shoot over here to Leslie and let her kind of go through some of the stuff that she's probably much of the same that you're going to hear. And I do want to go back to it at the end. We've got a number of questions about some things that Melissa brought up. And so I want to be sure we have time for that. So Leslie, let's see what you have to say. And then we may have some questions that we have to jump in there while you're talking. So we can't hear you. Unmute.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with you guys. We have been open. We did a little bit of quick background. We did close back in March originally because we typically follow the school district, but we are different. We are a year-round program. So we're here 5 days a week, 12 months of the year. And so we never really close. So it was a big issue for us to even close to begin with because we are considered essential because we are a full day program at this point. We serve infants to pre-K 4 and 5-year-olds. So really want to jump into it so that we have some time for questions. We did close back in March. We waited, we reopened for 1 week right after that closure just to see if we would have a demand. We did not. What we found from our community was our parents were able to work from home, make other arrangements, and they just weren't comfortable with sending their children. And so based on that, we didn't need to be open as an essential business for our families. We did, though, reopen in May. When we started to see all the reopening in Texas, I started, I sent a survey to my families to see what they were going to need, and I started to see a demand where people were having to go back to work and or they were just ready because it was a struggle working from home with infants and toddlers and 2-year-olds. So we opened on May 18th. That actually is also the day that the governor in Texas put out the information about reopening. The good news was when we got that information later that day, like Melissa said, it was what we had already done to begin with because we took the CDC guidelines and we put those into practice and we figured out what was going to work for us. One thing I would suggest is that you really get your teachers and your staff involved. What helped me was to say, okay, teachers, here's the requirements that you need to look at about changing, what changes you need to make in your physical environment in your classroom, what changes to the health and safety, cleaning, things like that, and social distancing. So here's all the guidelines that we looked at. I made a concise checklist for them. And then I gave them some time working with their co-teachers and their age group. And I said, well, what does this look like for you? So you take that opportunity and have some ownership to think about what does that look like in a 3-year-old classroom for social distancing and cleaning versus an infant or toddler? It's very different. That helped a lot. The teachers weren't as overwhelmed. They didn't feel like they just had a lot of requirements. They felt like they could take some ownership, and they had great ideas. I gave them some guidance of what I had thought about, maybe brainstorm with my office staff, but really the ones doing it day in and day out had some really great ideas. And I gave them the flexibility to say, look, so no one's had childcare in a pandemic, right? This is new to all of us, and we're going to kind of learn as we go. And so giving everybody, allowing that grace a little bit and just knowing that we may put some things in place and we may need to tweak it along the way has been great too. I mean, the staff has really had some great ideas along the way, and that takes a lot off of the head of school also. So my objective today is just to tell you a lot of the things we did are very similar or exactly the same as Melissa. So I'll talk more about maybe what I've learned throughout this time and what my challenges have been, because there's still challenges. Every day no matter what. So pick up and drop off, very similar to Melissa, all the signage. The biggest focus here is obviously it's the temp check, right? You want to do the temp check before they come, and you want to document and log that every single day. And you have your health questions. So the state did give us some guidance on what those questions should be, but I tweaked them and added my own because I wanted to think about what is the whole point of dropping off outside of the building and doing a temp check. It's because it is really, truly a health screening. That's what it is. So I let my parents know ahead of time. This is what the state gave us guidelines that we need to do. These are the questions that we're going to ask. This is the intent. This is a health screening. Part of that dictated to us that we were essentially assessing the child at that point. Do they look ill? Are they coughing? And do they have a temperature? Do they look like they don't feel well? I mean, that was part of that requirement. And so I just said, put that back on the parents too. And my first question every single day is this child showing any signs of illness? Or is anyone in the home ill? Is anybody sick right now? Because some of those symptoms that we're supposed to exclude for are pretty simple. A cough, a fever, a headache, a sore throat. So I just asked that right off the bat. The parents knew right away that that was the intent, and I think that helped throughout the process. So just ask your questions, but then also stick to those. And I've added questions as things have changed, especially in our area since we've become a hotspot. I've started asking more questions about travel and such.
Okay,
so,
but Leslie, I'm going to interrupt you because there is a burning question. And the question related to that is, if they say yes, do you admit the child?
No, I mean, for us, our parents drop off over a period of time in the morning because we don't have a designated time that we start, so a lot of times our kids are coming up and it's private. They're the only one there at the time. And so, yeah, I have sent children home at drop off if they have a fever. Parents, I'm going to tell you this right now. Parents do not wake up and check their child's temp before they come bring them to school. They just don't. And they're not going to either in COVID, even though you think they might, they're not. So yeah, we've had fevers, low grade, but they have a fever. And we've had some things where we had to, and I'll talk about a little bit about that. That has been one of my biggest challenges. So what I've started doing, and I'll just answer this now, is monitor your absences. That's the most important thing that I've probably learned in the last 2 weeks, and I've been open for 8-9 weeks or more. I feel like 500 weeks. Is that when they're out, you wonder, well, why are you out? So I put in a new policy. Hey, parents, now you're required to call when you're not here. We need to know, because I need to avoid that drop off. Well, what started happening is we stayed home a couple of days because they weren't feeling well, but it's just allergies. They're fine. Or it's just a summer cold. So they seem fine today, but here they are and they look miserable. And so I started having some issues with that. And I thought, drop off isn't the time for this. If they have questions, if they should return, then they could have made that phone call the day before, talk to me about their symptoms and on the phone. And so
So let me make sure I understand what you're saying. So we've got several questions here.
Mm-hmm.
You do ask these questions every day, correct?
Every day.
Mm-hmm. And is any sign of illness going to be something that you say, hey, we're out, you're not allowed to be here today?
Yeah, it is tough. Sort of like Melissa said, we know all of our children. A lot of them have been here for since they were infants. We know some of our kids who have super bad allergies. We know some of our kids who don't at all. And so sometimes the parents will talk to us and say, we went to the doctor, it's their normal allergies. They've been cleared by their doctor. But what we're sticking with, which is a big thing right now, is the 72 hours symptom free. So what I've told them is, that's great, especially talk with your pediatrician. As long as they've been good, symptom free for that period of time, then they can come back. Obviously, if a kid just sneezes once, that's not exclusion. But we're talking usually a combination of some symptoms.
So we will share, we'll be able to put together the list of questions that you ask, and we'll share that in the documents.
And what I did was, I just wanted to know, and really the way I ask it every day is, how's everybody doing? Is everybody feeling okay at home? You'll be surprised at what they share with you all of a sudden. And then you're like, well, hold on just a second, because what happened was I had a mom drop her child off for the day so that she could go get tested for COVID because she wasn't feeling well, and her job is very strict about this right now. And I said, well, so are we. So is everybody feeling well? If mom is standing in front of you and is sick, or dad's dropping off because mom's home really sick, then that child probably shouldn't be there till we know what's going on in the household. This is the biggest challenge that I've had.
Okay, so I do have another, and David may have to speak to this because this is a legal question that we heard about yesterday regarding logging temperatures. So you're saying you're logging temperatures, but yesterday there was a conversation about whether people should be documenting. If you don't have a school nurse, should you document? So David, could you speak to that? Because we've got several questions about that.
I was just happy to answer that. I think it's a little bit different if you're working with a licensed facility as opposed to a elementary school, for example. So I would double check with your licensing guidelines if you are operating a licensed facility with kiddos that age. So, for example, the TEA guidelines are not requiring that the school take temperatures and record that information of every student. Further, they're recommending that you don't record that information for health reasons. That's different with a licensed facility, is my understanding. I'll let the directors of the licensed facilities talk to that point specifically. But if you're ahead of a school that has both, then I think you have to get your arms around the idea of possibly running two different approaches on temperatures. One size is not going to fit all if you have both a licensed facility and then also an elementary school. So I'm going to turn over to Leslie to see if that's right, but I just want to confirm that because yeah, depending on the age kiddos you're working with, the guidelines are different.
Yeah. And so I've received clearance that, yes, I mean, we're still, so the state said we were required to do those. Then there was a period of time where licensing kind of relaxed on those requirements and said, all of this isn't required, highly recommended, not required. And then they went back and have required them again. I never stopped doing them because we're, as our business, we can have our own policies and we could still do those. Like they said, we could still do them. So the health department actually, and this might vary then too from county to county and city to city, but our health department, when I spoke with them also, because we're required to call them if we have a COVID case, actually said, make sure you're still doing those temperature checks every single day. That was a huge thing for them that we had a COVID situation, and that really helped us. So how I'm logging them is more of a check clear, like that they were under the threshold on that, the paper right now, it says 100.0. And so if they're checked off that they entered that day, then it was under that number. And so I make notes.
Yeah, so just be aware that, depending on the age kiddos that you're working with, it's very possible that you're going to have to navigate conflicting guidance and check in with your licensing authority, check in with your county health authority, and get some guidance on that if you're identifying things that are conflicting, because there's certainly conflicting guidance coming out.
And I will say too, it really varies from the health department. And like you said, from the city and county, that's what I have found. And so of course I, follow what I need to for San Antonio and Bexar County. I have seen from a lot of schools and daycares and centers from city and county, the guidance if they have a positive case is even different based on your location. So you really do need to look at your location specifically. So for us, mask, I'm going to touch on that really quickly because I know that that's a big topic. I do have a mask policy for my staff. My staff actually was on board. They wanted to wear the mask. They were fine with the mask even all day. So what they do is we wear it all the time when they enter the administration building or anytime they're in a common area. They wear them in their classroom when they're in close proximity with the children. And there was, if they're able to social distance, some of the classrooms are larger, especially with the older kids, they're in centers and the teachers, back in another part of the room, they're able to remove the mask at different times. But serving food, at any of those times of the day, they actually should be wearing a mask. That was the guidance for or anytime there's food around, those times. But really the staff just got used to wearing them. I'm used to wearing them. We're all used to wearing it. So they just wear it all the time. And it helped us because I did have a staff member test positive for COVID and we did not have to close. The first question the health department asked me, well, I had to give them the timeline and the details. A lot of it had to do with some of the details. But what I found from the health department was because at that moment she was not symptomatic, the one day that she was here, we got on top of it really quickly. You go with your gut. Because I had found out that someone in her family was getting tested. I just wasn't comfortable with it. I said, you just need to stay home for a few days till we figure this out. And sure enough, later down the road, they tested positive, she tested positive. So we minimized that risk very quickly. And what I found from the health department was because she was wearing a mask, and that teacher always wears her mask. She's a little paranoid, but she's a little older. She's just comfortable with it and didn't have symptoms. We were not required to close at all or close that classroom. We've not had any other cases in that classroom, no exposure to children. Everyone has been fine. Health department told me because of the policies that we have in place, temp checks every day, because we weren't required at that point, but we were still doing them, monitoring their health and wearing the mask, that we did not have to close. So that's
Leslie, on that, is you're providing masks?
I am, yes. So you'll want to provide the mask. They have some, a lot of them have some of their own. I always have a box with mask available so that no matter what, we provide that to them. I gave them some cloth ones. I purchased the, medical ones, the blue ones that are disposable every day. We always have those available. I am doing some research about the face shields. We have also purchased face shields, and we have given one to each teacher, and that's their face shield. Because I have some teachers, like in the older class, the 4 and 5-year-olds, they wear their shield a little more often because they're able to distance a little bit more throughout the day. So they maybe kind of go back and forth. And so I'm doing a little more research to make my policy about what they're going to need to do in either or, but they right now at least always wear their mask. So that's just what we're doing. And so a little bit about the COVID. Obviously, the first thing you'll want to do if you do have a case or a potential exposure even and you're not sure is just call the health department. Call licensing after that, and they just say, well, what did the health department tell you? And follow that. That's what they want you to do. And so hopefully you won't have those, but we've had a couple of exposures and a couple of situations, but only one true positive case. So next slide, Mary Catherine. I'll go on and talk about social distancing. So social distancing, I say it's not happening really with little kids. It's not happening, but that's okay. It doesn't really have to. They're toddlers and 2-year-olds, and it's great because of the parameters that are in place, like Melissa follows, where you stay in your pod. That becomes their little family. That's like their family at home, and this is their family here. That's their contained exposure, basically. And so as long as you keep those smaller sizes and don't combine groups, and keep some of those strategies in place, you don't have to worry about the kids not social distancing, because that's not going to happen. But I do recommend, we started off when we opened back up, we started off with a Healthy Me theme week. And that was fantastic because we just took the opportunity to say, let's just talk about it, because the kids were talking about it. COVID, and you're 3, you don't even know what COVID means. But so we started talking about, we started teaching personal space, which is really a good thing to do anyway. And just kind of turning circle time into games of what's a new greeting we could use today, air high fives and hugs and elbow bumps, and they get excited. They want to show me what they've learned. Look, I have a new way of saying hi, Miss Leslie. So we've involved the kids. And the good news is, to be honest with you guys, is the kids are on top of it. They really have picked up on all of the changes. And they're doing a great job. I've been in the class kind of monitoring and watching, and I'll see their centers. They have them spaced out in centers, smaller center groups. A child might be playing in one area, and he may want to go to the table to do an art table activity or something, and he'll go wash his hands before he moves to another activity, because it's now part of their new routine. Hand washing is the key. So what I found, and the teachers started doing it early on, was I just pretty much told them, you're going to feel like you're washing your hands all the time, but then after you do it all the time, it's normal, before and after every activity. And that's one of the ways we handle the sharing of toys situation. It is going to really help during flu and RSV season also. This is not going to change for us. We'll be keeping it forever. The kids just know, I played with this toy. Before I go move to something else, I'm going to wash my hands. They do it all the time. And it's really helped even with just our normal illnesses. And so a lot of things are similar to what Melissa's been doing as well. Out on our playgrounds, we do have a lot of toys. We like the kids to play outside with not just the playground equipment. So we just made bins for each classroom so that they're not sharing toys. Those are some different ideas that we may have. Also, toy cleaning stations. This has been a big one because I want my staff to clean their toys all the time. So I had to make it available to them. So we set up extra toy cleaning stations outside, then also in our kitchen where it's the 3-step process. So the Legos every day, the high touch, high frequency played with manipulatives and things, they get cleaned every day. I also found that the staff has got a lot right now. So I had some floaters helping out. They go and ask the teachers throughout the day, can I clean some toys for you? And it's a huge difference. And I've noticed when I send someone to help, we get a lot more toys cleaned. So biggest challenges is for me, I'll say, and maybe for during continue to be honest with you, is that your policies are going to need to change. So for me, when we opened in May, mid-May, things were still kind of shut down. It was a little bit easier, to be honest with you. It became more challenging when things really opened up, when parents could start going out and doing things. Then I had kids going to Schlitterbahn and SeaWorld and all over the place. And it became a little more challenging because then you start really worrying about the illnesses. So don't be afraid to make changes. What I had to remind my parents of was that you really want your school to be open. We want to be open to serve you. And so we have to work together so that we can make sure we can stay open. That's the bottom line. So they needed to really have a reminder that when you're bringing your children to this school, you don't have just the responsibility of keeping your family at home safe with your choices. You also have the responsibility of keeping this community here safe with your choices also. And that was a huge one. We had to have a little bit of a come to Jesus last week with my parents. I closed for a day or two around the holiday. I added an extra day because we had some illnesses going around. I needed to kind of pull back on the reins and gain some control back. And it really helped. Parents were very respectful of it, and they really understood because they saw San Antonio's cases were skyrocketing and we needed to pump the brakes a little bit. You're going to make some mistakes. There's been some where I thought, oh, I wouldn't have had that COVID case if I would have made her stay out one more day, whatever. But it's going to happen, and because it's a pandemic and we've never done this before. So just give yourself some grace. And I've had to remind myself, this is preschool. This is the best time ever. Preschool is so fun. So don't forget to have fun. We've been having fun days for our kids. That has helped even with our staff because they're stressed. They're worried, some days about COVID. So sometimes we just have to kind of forget all about that and just remember to have some fun. So you can always contact me if you should have some questions about my crazy 9 weeks or so that we've been back open.
I think we've lost Mary Catherine's audio. Can you hear her?
No.
We cannot hear Mary Catherine. Her audio is gone.
Silence Mary Catherine.
We've silenced Mary Catherine. Wow. So while that's going on, you may want to just log out and log back in, Mary Catherine. Let's take a few questions, if that is okay. So here's a great question, Leslie. What are you doing with regard to subs? So question about staffing and how are you handling substitutes when that need arises?
It's tough. So we do have, we've got pretty low enrollment right now, thankfully, which I was okay with. We started really low. We built up over the summer. And so we have a little bit of excess staff anyway. I tried to just assign the staff to that class, and that's pretty much who they work with only to kind of create that pod. And so if one of them's out, there's always another one of them to cover. So we've been pretty good. But it's because of our low enrollment. During the school year, yeah, it's going to be a challenge. I'm hiring subs right now, people specifically for the school year, to anticipate a little bit more of that, but it hasn't been a problem.
So another follow-up question about masks as well. I think we're in another situation where we may have competing guidelines depending on the age of the kids. The
Yes.
question is, I thought children have to wear masks yesterday according to TEA. So the TEA guidelines talk about following the most recent governor's executive order, which right now is saying if you're in a county with more than 20 cases, everyone wears a mask. With regard to kids, it's age 10 and up. So again, and who knows what that's going to look like when we actually start classes. So again, I think with regard to masking students, it goes back to the question of what age group you're working with.
Yeah. Our children do not wear masks. I do have a couple that wear them sometimes, and they do a really great job with it. We allow it if the parents want it, but no one does. I do have a contact at a school in Dallas where her children were wearing masks, and if somebody is that 2 and up were wearing them because that was kind of a mandate maybe in her area for a little while, and her kids have done great with it from her feedback, but I've not had any experience with that yet. But
okay, thank you for that. Mary Catherine, are you back with us?
I am back, and I'm sorry. And when I came back in, I lost all the Q&A, so I can't even see.
I've got all the Q&A, so I'm going to give it to you to maybe turn it over to Beth, and then I'll monitor Q&A from now on.
Okay, so thank you guys. Sorry about that. That's the joys of living in COVID-19 Zoom conferencing. So Leslie, great information, and we appreciate it. Now, Beth, what I'd like to do is just have you kind of wrap it up with your thoughts. You're going to be moving into the fall, and so we'd just love to have you kind of tell us how you've been approaching this.
I'm in a very lovely place in that what we are doing is still hypothetical. So my appreciation and goes out to those who have already had children in place and have been able to share their experiences. What I was hearing and what I'm finding in our program is the importance of finding what I would call, when I was in the classroom, the have-tos. And that's what I'm noticing about the programs that have been opening successful, is they've leaned into what is essential in the have-tos. And for those of us in Texas, that starts with the licensing guidelines and then how to adapt our programs specifically to those. And that's what I heard happening today with Melissa and Leslie's programs. And then for how we have been approaching those buy-ins have been very, very similar with focus groups with staff and families, because we did feel it was important to have buy-in from the people who were actually going to be implementing some of our processes. And then we practiced with some playground reunions for the students that were with our program that had their year cut short last year. Things like health screenings to try to give us some feedback, like Leslie has found, with asking very specific questions, and then following through with communication beyond that in travel and situations that would maybe put your school at risk. One of the best things that I have done in this focus group process was to open the staff and myself up for a town hall with our enrolled families at the end of our focus group process, and then using that information from families to develop a list of FAQs. I'll be happy to make those available. We processed that data about 2 weeks ago, and we've let it simmer, and it's just about ready to publish. The other things that I hear people doing, and I would recommend, is to look at your programs and play into your strengths. Our program across from Texas A&M has always been one that had a large outdoor space, and like Melissa, separate buildings. And so we are really trying to leverage our outdoor space to keep our children safe. The other thing that I can't emphasize more is ensuring or continuing your church-school relationship. Mm-hmm. And for us, that meant that to keep our ratios down in a classroom, that we had to encroach upon some church space. And even though the church isn't open, that still is their space. And then being able to dialogue with our very wonderful outdoor program and then offering that up to an outdoor worship space for the church itself. So please, in this time, don't neglect to cultivate those relationships with your church and school as an Episcopal school. A couple of things that I hear people were challenged by, and some processes that we're putting in place that I would like to share, particularly about maybe the meet the teacher nights or what we used to do, or home visits. We are opening our classrooms up the week before we actually open our program to a personal classroom visit with a parent and a child, and then allowing space in between for cleaning. And we felt that this was an important way for our families, because we're all starting a new school year and a new classroom, and it was a way for at least our parents to have an opportunity to be in a classroom knowing that once school starts and we actually have children in our care, that they won't be allowed as freely into the classroom. And then to spend some time in our focus groups really leaning into staff and family about some of the little things that make preschool fun so that we can still do preschool. An example of that would be for us is our birthday snacks, which are important to parents and children, but can cause problems with transferring food back and forth. And so we've created a birthday menu for our children, and a sort of a special birthday thing that the children get to choose the snack that we provide from a list of approved birthday snacks. And we had suggestions from families of what that would ultimately be for the child. So little things to encourage community is what I'm seeing happening and what we are leaning into. And Leslie, you mentioned this more than once, and it's something that I'm holding dear, is this concept of grace, giving yourself grace, giving your staff grace, and giving your families some grace. We're all have an overwhelming sense, working through an overwhelming sense or a low-level sense of fear at the basis of a lot of our decisions, and we never do our best when we do, and when we play with fear. And opening that up for dialogue, I think, and allowing yourself to be vulnerable has been very helpful in our planning process with our families. In the town hall, one of the more we did talk. I have a very directly talked about tuition, and I think that's that finance is part of that fear. But again, Leslie and Melissa, I think both touched on this in that we are doing everything as a school, and I think it's important to communicate that to families or a care center to keep your child safe. But the research shows that those of us who are actually on the front lines are probably more vulnerable. And so we are counting on our families to keep us safe so that we can continue to do the work that we feel is so important. And I am holding on to that, and I am hopeful that our school and that each school here will be these sanctuaries of kindness and fun for the children in a otherwise somewhat stressful time. And that's the my summary of this event, and then I'll be happy to ask questions or answer questions as well. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of this.
Thank you so much, Beth. And we're about 5 minutes over, but if the panel is okay with this, let's go another 5 minutes or so, if you're okay with that, to take some questions. We've got some really great questions. I'd like to touch on those to the extent that we can. This one's from Melissa. Melissa, you referenced your Facebook page. The question was just wondering whether or not your Facebook page is public, or is that a page that people have to subscribe to?
So we have a Facebook page that is public, and we have a photograph release on all of our children, and we don't ever allow parents or anyone to tag. We've got it locked down so that children can't be tagged, like their faces can't be tagged with parents' names or anything like that. So that is open and public, but restricted, if you will. And then we use Child Pilot as our parent portal. And so that's closed. And so then we would send pictures that were more specific to individual children through that. So for example, if we had a child who was new to us and their parent was concerned about them settling down and being happy throughout the day, then we would send those types of individual pictures to the parent. But just general classroom type pictures, those are on our regular Facebook page.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Melissa. I'm going to throw this to Leslie. So what about singing? how are you approaching singing in the classroom? That is a staple of what we all do, but yet we also are recognizing that there's a lot of, there's no delicate way to say this. There's more spit to contend with when you're dealing with those kinds of activities. So how are you approaching that?
Yeah, they're preschoolers love to sing, and
Sure.
that for sure. And so they're doing it. Their teachers are trying to do a little more maybe music and movement, where they're just, because they're trying to keep them active and such. They are singing, but the key is for us is they're in their pods. The exposure is there already. So they're not mixing. So like chapel would be an issue if we mixed classes together and we all sang, but they're together with those kids all day long. We're here at 7:30 to 5:30. The exposure is the same whether they sing or not. So
and speaking of pods and mixing, one of our participants said the before and after school no mixing is a huge problem for my program. Can we combine children and just have parents sign a waiver stating that they understand the situation? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, Leslie, and then we'll open it up to Beth and Melissa as well.
So what you're going to find with a lot of the requirements, at least for our area, is as feasible, right? Because they know that a lot of childcare centers especially have a very difficult time operating under some of these strict guidelines. We're not financially having staff that long of a day, especially if you may have lower enrollment. So technically, and you want to double check, if it was a hardship, you would need to maybe, I did this for a little while, but I considered them one group. I didn't combine everyone. There was one group I kept together. I knew more kids were coming, and so I split them, but they were always one family, if that makes sense, because of I kept them together at first until more enrollment came, and then I split them. They've had the same exposure. They're around each other all the time. So even though technically I split them to two classes, they really are one pod because of some enrollment situations. So I mean, you could get creative with combining that way, but you wouldn't be able to combine all the groups.
Perfect. Beth or Melissa, do you have any other comments on that particular topic?
It's definitely an issue for the fall that we're really trying to navigate. For right now, because I have so few children that would need early care, and then just few enrolled to begin with. The classroom teachers have been able to manage it. As a matter of fact, we've only had one situation that needed early care so far this summer, and it was a sibling set. So again, she was just saying, Beth was just saying, those children weren't exposed because they were siblings. So to keep them together, and then when the other children begin to arrive, split them off into their regular pods, that's really an okay situation. We've actually experienced that a couple of times with our aftercare as opposed to before care, where we had a sibling set that needed to stay. And so we were able to just go ahead and combine them because they're going home together already. And so again, it didn't really change things. The regulation is as feasible. So we're trying really hard to not do it. And the couple of times we have had to, it's just been siblings.
Right. Question for all three of you. Are any of your programs using plexiglass dividers for your tables?
No.
Okay. Let's see. Trying to pick one or two more. We talked about subs a little bit. Oh, one other. Leslie, you mentioned cleaning. You mentioned toy cleaning. What Melissa mentioned this solution that she's using. Do you remember what you're using to clean toys with?
We did have to change ours. We go through a service. We use Ferguson, Matera, and we have, Benny Keith. We use a couple of services for ordering supplies. We've not had any issue getting any of our supplies, and we did have to change it. And at the moment, I can't think of the name of it. But if someone wants to email me, I can share that with you.
Perfect. And we're sharing email addresses.
Yeah.
And then one final question. I'm going to give this to Beth because I believe, Beth, last time I was on your campus, I think I remembered seeing water play tables. Is that right? What does that look like for the upcoming year? Are you doing any of that with water play?
So we will buy into Leslie's hand washing theme, so that children within their pods, if they before or after the play, which is sort of a standard process anyway in a preschool classroom. So any type of water play we will allow, but it will just be that hand washing before and after for that.
Perfect.
David,
Okay.
if I can kind of address that too.
Please.
During our summer fun program, we do a lot of water play. We have sprinklers going on our playgrounds. I mean, it's Texas, it's hot. But what we've done is we've added just a little bit of Dawn dish soap to all of our water play areas, and we've given paintbrushes to all the kids and sponges. And so they are really helping us clean and sanitize things, because that's what little ones do. And so they take the paintbrushes and they paint with soapy water everything from our little playhouses to the bicycles. They wash our bikes like they watch their older siblings or their parents wash their cars. So everything gets really clean every day.
That's a great idea. What a great idea.
And Melissa, what we've tested out very similar for ours is in our tricycle area is there's a area now labeled car wash, and so and the kids will be responsible or helpful in taking ownership of keeping things clean.
They love it. Yes.
Yeah, one thing I would like to reiterate, I know that we had a lot of questions that were a little specific about ratios and things like that, and so I have put in the chat all the emails. Those will also be on the resources that we add into the document section of the website. But I would just encourage you, all three of these panelists have agreed to be a part of this, and I know that they'd be happy to take questions that are specific, you know, like tuition policies and that sort of thing. I don't know that any of us have, obviously we're all looking for answers. So just know that these three panelists I know will be willing to answer specific questions about things that maybe that we missed today. So
yeah, and also don't forget to use the heads discussion board.
Yes,
because there's all these kinds of conversations are taking place on the discussion board. Class size, how are you handling this? How are you handling the aftercare versus the preschool, before school care, all those things. So make sure to take advantage of that as well. And we're right at 15 minutes past the hour. So I'm sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but again, you've got emails for the participants and you've also got access to the discussion board. So please use those resources. And before we head out, I just want to take a moment to thank Melissa and Beth and Leslie for taking the time to show your work as you work through all of these questions. Y'all are doing amazing jobs for your school and for the families that you serve. So thank you all so much for taking the time to be with us. And Mary Catherine, anything else before we wrap up?
I don't think so. Just remember, just as a reminder too, David and I are always available. Just shoot us an email, give us a call. We're here to, we just want to offer as much support as we can. And we're just thankful to be collaborating together through this very difficult time.